out and away we
Bing bang.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Paddock Talk podcast. I am Kyle.
I'm Scott.
And I'm JP.
And today, because we had a break in the F1 calendar, we're going to be talking about NASCAR. The only thing I know about NASCAR is what it stands for, and that's because I looked it up. So NASCAR stands for the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. That's all I got.
Wow,
I'll say this.
pretty impressive.
They turn left a lot.
See what's gonna happen. I'm gonna go straight, and then I'm gonna make a left turn.
No, you know what? For being my first actual time watching a NASCAR race, I thought it was pretty exciting.
It was. It was a race. I'll give it that.
Listen, just because Gunther Steiner was there doesn't make it any better, okay? I mean, let's be honest. He added to the broadcast, but that doesn't make it great.
Did you guys see the little video of him walking? I think I sent it to both of you, but I can't remember. Of Gunther in the garage area. I almost said paddock. The garage area. And he's like walking around looking confused, and he's like, "This doesn't look right. I need to call Gene."
Yeah. 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 But I mean, in all seriousness, I think it's nice, or I don't want to say nice, but I think it's great to see, NASCAR reaching out to someone from F1 because, as we talked, to kind of start the season, we have American drivers in F1 now. So it's kind of nice to see maybe NASCAR, pulling someone in with Haas has been kind of, in NASCAR a little bit with Tony Stewart and stuff like that. So it's nice to see them kind of do maybe what I call some cross promotion to maybe open that door to people.
Oh yeah, it was interesting. And the reason why we were talking about NASCAR, not because we needed something to talk about, is because two former F1 champions were in the field, and Kimi Räikkönen and Jenson Button. But yeah, it's a good European flavor. It may be NASCAR trying to reach to get some of the F1. How do I say this correctly? Trying to get some of that F1 shine onto NASCAR, since F1's on the rise and NASCAR seems to be on the decline here in the States.
Well, I think it's that people, and I'll say this from a personal standpoint, which we'll get into some of this, but I feel like NASCAR doesn't know who they are right now, and they've been kind of, I guess, pulling at some short straws the last couple of years to figure it out. But I feel like F1 knows what they are, and they've just been able to market it like, this is F1. This is what it is. Let's go.
Yeah, they're their premier racing series in the whole world. That is their kind of mission statement for racing, and NASCAR is kind of more. It's past the good old boys statement that it used to be back in the day. Now it's more national. It's kind of growing out to other countries, but it'll never be, obviously it'll never be an F1. But I enjoyed the race. It was more like bumper cars, but it was still entertaining race nonetheless.
Yeah, I just feel like with NASCAR, and I mean, I guess you could kind of say this for F1. I thought there's just a big disparity between the teams. But when I look at F1, I feel like some teams have closed that gap, i.e., Aston Martin with Fernando this year so far. So I feel like NASCAR is in that place of like, how do we bring, I guess, a lower tier team up to the level that some of the higher teams are?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely with the new regulations, which is kind of weird because both sports started new regulations last year with F1 doing the whole new car, this more budget cap to keep teams more confined. So Red Bull and Mercedes are spending 400 million a season on a team and confine them to 140 million, 135 now. NASCAR had their new gen car, which is supposed to be safer, air quote cheaper, which didn't become cheaper because you have to spend more money buying these chassis from a outside contractor who builds them. You have to buy all the parts from said contractor. It's no more manufacturing like it used to be. NASCAR used to be kind of like F1, where they would construct, build their own chassis, build their own engines. They would, they would build everything in shop. Now it's you have to buy it or lease it from. You have to buy your chassis. You have to buy your stuff. You have to lease your motors, buy your motors from another supplier, and even at I'll give a generous 10 to 15 million to run a NASCAR season, it's still a really big drop off. You only have three big teams, and the rest are almost like a Williams or a Haas in F1. They're all just back markers who don't have a shot in hell of winning or being extremely competitive.
So I guess I guess for me that brings me to a point is that if you're kind of outsourcing everything, then what is the team really doing? Do they just change tires? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like there's no connection to the car, to where F1, like the Red Bull, hey, the Aston Martin looks like Red Bull because Red Bull figured it out. So I feel like sometimes in NASCAR, I guess that's maybe the appeal of the stock car in air quotations, that I feel like just every car is kind of the same. Like, what are you really doing to justify your car being different than anyone else?
And you're to what I've seen with the new NASCAR regulations, it's more you're just housing the car. You can't really work on anything besides little things. So yeah, you're pretty much just storing a car, doing your aerodynamic testing, doing your probably doing your chassis dynoing stuff, and that's kind of about it. You don't have any chassis builders. You don't have body hangers. You don't have anything else like we did 5, 10 years ago, where you hired specific guys to do one area, like you do in F1. Like there's aerodynamicists, there's chassis builders, there's front suspension, there's electricians, there's everything to pile a car and make it one. It's kind of just let's buy it like a kit, put it together, and do our best to cheat it up the best we can.
Well, that settles it. I'm still waiting on you and Kyle to marry some sugar mama so that we can have an F1 team, or excuse me, a NASCAR team, excuse me, because we can just part
Well,
everything out in NASCAR. Just if two of you could meet a sugar mama, we'd be great.
yo, dude, I've been trying this for like the last 15, 20 years. If it ain't happened yet, I mean, I
Speaking
guess there's
of,
always a lottery.
yeah, with what you guys were saying, do you think there are too many teams in NASCAR then? How many teams are there?
Um, okay, so in NASCAR, some of the differences, um, and then I'll let JP discuss since he's got the next amount of knowledge in front of Kyle, who has like a 0.5% of knowledge.
Hmm.
So in F1, you have your 10 teams that are locked in. So as they've talked with the Andretti Autosport trying to get in, you have to get all 10 teams to decide, then they share prize money, and then that, and then they may let a new team in. In NASCAR, you have 36 guaranteed cars in the field. They're
Wow.
chartered cars. So NASCAR decided it'd be a good idea to each team has to buy a charter for these cars, and they have to repay the entry fee every year for it. It's I think a couple million. It just keeps going up. It used to be like a million. Now I think if you lease it from another car, it's like 7 to 8 million.
Yeah.
So anyway, you have 36 guaranteed entries in. So the field will always be at least 36 cars. Now there are other people who can say buy a car from said manufacturer, get it ready, and then go to a race. Those are I don't know how they classify them now, they're like outside runners. They have to make it in speed. So the max field is 40 cars for a NASCAR field.
Wow.
So say if 36 are guaranteed show up, and then 7 of these outside cars or outside owners show up, then only 4 can make the race, and it would be based off of your qualifying speed.
Hmm.
I mean, it used to be a 43 car field, and some races like Daytona or Indy back in the 90s, early 2000s, you'd get 55 to 60 cars showing up to qualify for one race.
That's crazy.
When you think about it, let's look at it. There's only 17 full-time teams. So if you look at NASCAR as a whole, you have 17 full-time teams, but then like Scott said, you have a couple of, I guess I don't want to call them outliers, but they're kind of Junior Johnson wants to run a car this weekend, so his team's going to show up with a car. Just to kind of throw a name out there in NASCAR is a guy who might would field a car, might would not. So when you look at that, there's only about 40 cars in NASCAR now that really kind of have a chance to really, like start that grid. And I kind of give them credit for opening that up to people who, I kind of correlated to the movie Days of Thunder. They were an upstart race team. So I felt like NASCAR has tried to do a little bit to maybe if there's someone out there who wants to get their feet wet, maybe they can see what it's like to field a car and really see if they want to move forward, that they might make a weekend or two, but not make every weekend so that maybe they can actually see like, is this beneficial for me to keep doing this? So I might want to say, good on NASCAR for allowing people to do that to see if they really want to do this full time.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. Like say if you're a good old boy driver, I'm trying to think off top, like a Carl Long is the first thing that popped in my head in NASCAR, who is a independent owner who scrapes together as much money as he can and fields a car when he can at least try to make money or when he has sponsorship. So when they did this whole new car, like it just like for guys like that who have already purchased cars, who have already done this, that's also another expense. Now he has to spend $500,000 on this car and then lease out another engine just to make, a cup race. Like NASCAR is trying to go the way of F1. To me, it's how it feels. They're trying to cater to the established owners who have the money, like your Rick Hendrick, your Joe Gibbs, your
Richard Childers.
Richard Childress, your oh my God, Stuart Haas Racing, Front Row Motorsports, Petty Racing, or what are they called now? Hall of Fame.
I think it's Hall of Fame Racing or something like that.
Racing Enterprises now. That's the 2-car team that Jimmy Johnson drives part-time for now this year. Yeah, they've kind of catered to the big teams to where they kind of run the club and chase your little guys out. But to NASCAR's credit, though, they've made it to where it's 36 more competitive teams. It's not like back in the day when it was like maybe 10 drivers were going to show up who were going to have a chance to win. Now it's kind of more your 15, your 20 guys who any given race may actually win it. In Daytona and Talladega, your or your restrictor plate races, it's whoever starts, you automatically have a chance to win the race because they're either wreck fest or the cars are just so equal on those tracks. Like it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at the difference in, for instance, let's say Richard Petty. During his heyday, especially at like Daytona, he had a big wing on the car. Hey, if you can hold it in the track, go win the race. We don't care how big your motor is. But I feel like NASCAR tried to close that gap over the years to make the racing a little more competitive. To say, hey, just because you bring the biggest engine, we're going to put a restrictor plate on it so that we're going to restrict what that engine can do because we don't want someone just blowing everybody away because he's faster on the straights. and he just makes it, in air quotations, makes it through the corners. So I think that was, something that NASCAR really struggled with for a while. But I think the restrictor plate racing, when you look at it now, it's really made for better racing in the long run for people. And it wasn't just about building the bigger engine to where I think in year, let's go back to the 60s or 70s. It was all about bootlegging who had the biggest engine and just could hold the car in the road.
Yep, it was pretty much bring what you got. If it was legal-ish, go ahead and run it.
Yeah. Air quotations, air
Legal-ish.
quotations, legal-ish.
I think nowadays it's hashtag air quote legal-ish. But yeah, I think 60s and 70s we saw a lot of that, and then NASCAR, the sanctioning body was kind of like, like, is this really substantial? Like, is this monetarily substantial for us to have one or two guys finish on the lead lap, and then the rest of the field is like third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, or 2, 3, 4 laps down? Yeah, so they had to kind of rein some of those guys in for sure on that.
Yeah, and listen, I agree with that because at the end of the day, it's kind of like F1. People want to see good racing. It would be crazy if we told everybody in F1, oh, just build the engine as big as you want to, but then they can't hold it through a city. You know what I'm saying? Like nobody wants to see 10 cars wreck because the driver
Oh
can't
yeah,
hold it. So, I
yeah,
kind of
and
applaud NASCAR for kind of saying, hey, we want you guys to drive to the limit, but to the limit is within said reason. So,
oh yeah, totally agree. And plus, if a car is wrecked in an F1 race, that's half the field, and that's
yeah,
not a fun race. That's really not a fun race, as we've seen a couple times in F1 history with the
yeah.
wreck fest.
Mhm.
Some of the differences in NASCAR, if you're not familiar with NASCAR, if you're not familiar with F1, and you get all your information from us, which is great. This is fantastic. Like, I'm
Yeah.
glad we can help you. So, NASCAR actually adopted F1's qualifying structure uh, with the Q. They don't call it Q1, 2, and 3, but they have I think it's a 15-minute qualifying session where everybody goes out and then they take the top 20 cars. That I didn't look up because they've just been running this the last few years. Then that set of cars, they do the top 10, and then after that, that's your pole shot. It used to be single car qualifying where one car would run, next car on the track, next car on the track. Fastest time is set 1 through, we'll say, 40, and that was your time. That was your starting position in the race, which for NASCAR I feel worked because some of the tracks aren't as, I don't know, even like with the road course qualifying, it's weird to see it in a sport other than F1 or an open wheel open wheel series, because it's just like you got cars running, they do one lap, and they come into the pits for 13 minutes. They'll cool their car off, get ready to make one more run. At least in F1, they do their warm up lap, run, go, cool down, go in the garage, sit for a few minutes, and then go up, right back out for their last run.
Unless you're Max and you
Well,
know you
but
have the fastest car.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I would say, my biggest takeaway from that is at least in F1, if the car is sitting, it's probably because you did the fastest lap, so you're waiting to see what other people did. Um, I feel like in NASCAR, I feel like it's a little more, I guess, judgmental by like what do I do on the track, depending on the team. Because again, if you're a team just trying to make the race, you could go out there and be like, hey, I'm in the top 20. I'm going to pull back and save the engine, save the car. There's no reason for me to push it because we're not really like vying for a championship. To where I feel like in F1, anybody could sneak up in the championship. So the qualifying means just a little more in F1 than it does to be in NASCAR right now. But again, that's just, kind of from the outside looking in.
Oh yeah, like in a NASCAR race, most of the tracks they run, your qualifying lap is anywhere between 20 seconds on a short track to, we'll say, 35 seconds on an intermediate track. And then your road courses, your Daytona, your Poconos are close to a minute. Maybe the road courses are going to be a little bit over a minute. In F1, most their timed qualies are, we'll say, around 1 minute 10 to close to 2 minutes at like bigger tracks like Singapore and Spa. So I mean, it just seems better for an F1 than NASCAR to me, like just to fit.
NASCAR, I always loved the fact that they would just, hey, whoever had the fastest car this weekend, go run your lap and let's see who it is. I never really felt the need for them to do, like a 3-2-1 or 1-2-3 or segments or whatever it is they want to call it. I just always felt like it was about whose car was set up right with the springs, whose car was set up right with, the tires, what they're allowed to do, and just kind of go make your fastest lap and let's go.
Oh, exactly. It used to be, well, before they did one-shot qualifying, it was 2-day qualifying where on, say, Friday, the whole field would run. They take the top 25 times. Those cars were locked in. And then the
Yep.
next day, they'd have last chance qualifying to where the guys who didn't make the top 25 would either run a new lap or sit at their time. And then if you sat on your time and say 20 guys ran and did faster, you went home. It was more like chess back in the day. So
Yeah. And again, I think to me, I felt like that was the golden age of NASCAR was when those people when they had to play chess with the other team, like, okay, I just qualified, the top 25, but then you're at number 26. So you're like, okay, I need to, I'm gonna make some adjustments for the car. I'm gonna, take the rear wing down or up. I'm going to adjust the shock for the car because I want to try to get in that top 25 and prove someone here this weekend and go win a race for the money. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, it's about getting money, you know?
oh yeah, it's about yeah, it's definitely about trying to make the race and make as much money as you can because you don't want to. I mean, you want to make tire money, gas money, travel money for the next race. I mean, if you're not making a race, you're not. All you're getting is so long and good luck.
Yeah, so long, good luck. I mean, the same thing, like, let's just say air quotations, you go to the club, the person that makes the most money does the most work. So yeah, let's just throw that out there for everybody. So, if you want to be fast, you'll make a little more money. If you don't, then hey, you're gonna be on the outside looking in.
Remember, if you're not first,
unless
you're
unless
last.
thanks, Ricky Bobby. But yeah, unless you're a pay driver, and then it doesn't matter. Like you just have daddy spend money and just keep trying to race and trying to make it. What do you care?
Joe Logano. Oh, I'm sorry, I said that out loud. My bad.
Oof, 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 burn, ow. I mean, not wrong, but still, ow, ow. I mean, he's got what, one or two championships though for a pay
I
driver.
got a mustache like Dale. I got a mustache. It's cool.
All right, Kyle. Any other questions you want to ask
Yeah, I
before
did.
we
So
kind of talk more?
I didn't catch the
Yeah,
beginning of the race. So is NASCAR a rolling start or is it a standing start like F1?
it is a rolling start. So
Okay.
Yep.
they uh they go behind the quote unquote safety car or pace car
Hmm.
for a couple laps, warm their tires up, make sure the grids everybody's sliding the right grid position, and then there is a restart zone before the start finish line. So when you hit that restart zone, the leader sets a pace. So he can either go right when they enter the restart zone, they can go when it's towards the end of the restart zone, so they follow the leader. So if the leader gets a good jump, he's trying to get a good position going into turn one.
Okay.
That listen, uh, uh, I'm sorry, I just can't get down with that. Because what if he knows his car is crap through turn one? He slows everybody down, comes out of turn two in the lead, and then like takes off in like turn three. Like, listen, one thing I love about F1 is the standing start. Is let's see who can get a jump on this light, and let's see who can maneuver their car through turn one and who can get there. Because I mean, how many times in F1 have you seen the fastest car lose the lead in turn one because somebody got a better jump?
We saw it at Jeddah.
Yep.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
And that's why I said like I listen, we're the Paddock podcast and we talk a lot about F1, but like I just don't understand the rolling start because now I feel like a guy who has a lesser car could control the start of that race. And to me, that's not what it's about. It's about who can get their car in position into turn one. And then that sets the race for everybody. But again, just personal preference. I don't want to say it's wrong, and I get what NASCAR is maybe trying to do is you kind of make the field play to the people who qualify better, but I don't necessarily agree that that's the better way to race.
Yeah, I would love to see NASCAR go to a standing start. I know it'll never happen in a million trillion years
Yeah,
because all the NASCAR buffs and historians will be like, "That's not how it's been. That's not how it's been. That's not how it's been." Well, yeah, NASCAR's losing viewership. It's uh, the product's kind of piss poor right now. I mean, why not learn from F1? Try to raise, you know, try to raise your game up a bit. Let's see these cars. Let's see who the real drivers are on standing starts. Let's see what you can do.
yeah.
Hmm.
Because believe it or not, I mean, looking at an F1 car, you're gonna have the fastest car in the weekend, but have a bad start, or vice versa. You could have the worst car of the weekend, but have a great damn start. So I think that when you look at it, I just thought the standing start is about driver reaction, it's about car reaction, and it's about just getting there. But I also understand, it's always tough to break up what I call the status quo.
Hmm. And it's the same with F1 purists who are set in their ways and like this and like that. And um, I can see the argument if they didn't want to do it, but hey, I mean, now's the time to kind of try it. You're starting to try to bring European drivers into the sport. Uh, why not give it a whirl? What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, say
yeah.
say you try for 2 or 3 races at 2 or 3 select courses and it doesn't work, then you don't have to go back to it. But I think anything is worth a gamble to try and see how it goes.
Well, I mean,
Hmm.
NASCAR has two exhibition races scheduled every year in the Busch Clash and your All Star race. Why not try it there and see how it works?
Hmm.
I agree. Let's transition, if you guys want to some F1 drivers who have switched to NASCAR.
Hmm.
Ooh,
I mean,
me
you
likey.
know, uh, two come up this year. We have who is it? I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll through and find the names right now as I think about it.
I know of one. It was
Um,
Well, we.
Jean Girard.
yeah.
No.
um,
You made me spill my macchiato.
My macchiato.
that's a no go, sir. Um, but as we Daniel Kavat and Kimi Raikkonen, come to kind of come to NASCAR and kind of have their place in time. But I think the biggest thing for me is, you know, I think that's a hard switch to make because we were talking about two totally different cars.
Yeah, you're talking about a NASCAR Cup car, which is narrower, and got to be twice the weight of an F1
Yeah.
car. It has to be at least twice the weight. So yeah, you're definitely it's a learning curve. I totally forgot Kvyat had a NASCAR race under. I think a NASCAR one or two NASCAR races under his belt last year.
Yeah, he did last year, and I think for me, probably when I kind of look through the names of people that have done that, I would probably say the most two well-known names are probably Juan Pablo Montoya, who I like to call Juan Pablo, not sure I can drive Oya, and then also Scott Speed. Are probably two of the more what I call, famous drivers from F1 to NASCAR that have made that transition, and both have won some races. I mean, Juan Pablo Montoya, I don't want to say he was bad in NASCAR. I just never felt like he fit in NASCAR. I felt like the kind of racing he wanted to do just wasn't really conducive to how a NASCAR drove. But he did win a road course or two, and kind of help bring NASCAR to a population of people that have may never really heard about it before.
Yeah. Yeah. He had actually two wins in the NASCAR Cup Series and one in the Xfinity Series, which would be the feeder series if you're an F1 fan. Your feeder series into the Cup Series. Um, but yeah, he was always pretty competitive on the road courses. Towards the end of his career, the oval racing, his confidence grew better on it. Uh, no, I think Juan Pablo is probably the one of the better drivers to go from F1 to NASCAR. Scott Speed, I mean, he was just god awful with Red Bull Racing and Toro Rosso. Yeah, was he even there a whole year? Um, I'm trying to remember if he was even in F1 a whole year, and then comes to the States with the Red Bull sponsorship, and then Red
Yep.
Bull Racing. The Red Bull started their own NASCAR Cup Series uh, team, and he was one of their main drivers. And it was about the same as F1 career. He ran for quite a few years, but just one top five in his whole Cup Series career in like 4 to 5 seasons. Like kind of mirrors F1 career. But Juan Pablo is actually more known for his let me see. How's the best way to put this? His more igniting driving.
Yeah.
Because it was in
Hmm.
2000, oh my God, 10 years ago when he spun during a caution flag and ran into the jet dryer at Daytona and caught the track on fire.
Yep.
What?
Yeah, look that up, YouTube it. Juan Pablo Montoya jet dryer. Yeah. Lost control of his car, and as the jet dryer was on top of the track, blowing debris. I'm pretty sure it was debris. I think there was like a caution. Lost control and just drove straight into it and blew it up. Like, I'm glad he didn't get hurt and blew it up.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
If memory serves me correct, I think he tried to blame that on Danica Patrick. No, not really. But I think he was a classic case of a guy that could drive some cars, but he just, again, I just felt like he could never get the hang of a NASCAR because, again, you just said it. You're talking about double the weight. You're talking about different wheels. You're talking about a totally different engine. I mean, at the time that Juan Pablo was in F1, where you're talking about engines that are like keen to go 200 plus miles an hour. I mean, very few times in NASCAR are you ever, if not ever, going to go 200 plus miles an hour. Um, so, I felt like maybe it was something that he tried. And hey, kudos to the guy again. A road course or two, he won, had a couple top five finishes, but was just never there. But, you look through some of the other names, there's Nelson Piquet Jr., who we all know is from a racing family in F1. You had Jacques Villeneuve, you had, and then with Kimi Raikkonen, who actually had won a world championship in F1. So there's been a couple of guys try to make that switch, but I just think it's harder than most guys could ever realize. when you come in to turn left than it is going from an F1 car.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you allude to, Jacques Villeneuve, he didn't have much of a career in NASCAR, just 5 starts in the Cup Series, hit and miss. His last one was last year in the Daytona 500. Actually drove and made it in, like actually qualified for the 500. He wasn't one of the go-home drivers. So at 51 years old is an accomplishment. Um, in the Xfinity Series, he did have a couple top 5 finishes. I think his one of them was in Montreal on his father's track, his father's name track, I should say, Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Yeah, Nelson Piquet Jr. had a actually decent NASCAR career. Cup Series, not so much, but he had an Xfinity win and 2 truck wins. And you know what? Not a single one was at a road course. They were on
Ooh,
oval tracks like Michigan, Vegas, stuff like that. So, I mean, I guess that
and
makes up for the whole the crash gate thing, you know.
yeah, and I mean, looking at that, I will say what an achievement for a guy who's not used to, who wasn't used to racing on oval tracks. Because let's be honest, hardly none, if any, of your F1 tracks are ever going to be on ovals. I mean, not really. There might be some, not every race is through the city, but to go and turn left only and to kind of, turn that into those, I think that's, has to be a feather in his cap to be able to adapt to that style of racing in the way that he did, not necessarily being with a DEI or one of the bigger teams in NASCAR at the time, not a Hendrick or Petty, trying to even get up in the top 5 or the top 10. I definitely think that lets you know what he was putting into it.
hmm And one name we didn't actually talk about is, you know, the biggest name ever in Mario Andretti, one of the biggest names in racing history. One only one win in NASCAR, and that was the Daytona 500. If you're gonna have your one win, that's the race you want to do it. Also, Monaco Grand Prix winner, a Indy 500 winner. Like that name is just synonymous with racing. And his son is
I mean,
one son of kind of a, not held up to that name, but
but I'll say this: if you're a racing driver, and I told you you could win Monaco, Indy, and Daytona. Name me one driver who wouldn't take those 3 wins. I mean, obviously people want to be world champions. They want to be Monster Energy champion, NASCAR champion. But think about what it says about him to win those 3 races in those 3 classes of racing. Because in those 3 classes of racing, that's I want to say the big 3. When you break F1, Indy, and NASCAR down, that's kind of the big 3 when you think about it, really.
yep. And when we were looking up like just show notes for the show, I didn't realize that like when he won the 500 in 86. Oh my God, 86 in 68. That like he was just like he hadn't even started an F1 yet. He had already had talks like to go into F1 because he was mostly running Indy and open wheel stuff, and then the occasional NASCAR race in between, and then he got to F1. So like he was kind of one of the rare guys who went from the states, racing in the states, to overseas, and I mean Formula One world champion, and the last American Formula One champion in over 43 years now. I think we're going on
Yeah.
43 years.
Mm.
And I'm not sure I see that being topped in the near future. I mean, let's be honest. And not to take away from, we've got some guys now, Logan Sargent and some names, but just look at the teams that he was racing with. I don't know if we will ever see that mark top just yet by way of, that analogy of being an American born driver and winning an F1 World Championship. But I'll tell you what, Kyle, I got a little bit of history here for you.
Mm.
The
Uh-oh.
Let's hear it.
first NASCAR competition held outside of the US was in Canada. So you do have that distinction. The first race that NASCAR held outside the States was in Canada. It was on July 1st of 1952. Buddy Schumann won a 200 lap race on a half-mile dirt track in Stamford Park, Ontario, near Niagara Falls. So it is near Niagara Falls. I don't know how deep we were into Canada, but that was the first race held outside the States for NASCAR. It was actually in 1952.
Yeah, let's hold a race
Hmm.
outside the U.S. Where should we go? 15 minutes up the road? Sounds good.
Right. So sounds good, bud. Still got those TV rights, huh?
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, hey, yeah. I mean, actually, they did hold a race. If you guys, well, Kyle wouldn't remember, but JP, I don't know if you remember when they held exhibition races in the late '90s, I believe, at the Fuji and Suzuka circuits. They would go, they would go to Japan and run just exhibition races at the end of the season. I think they only ran two
All
or
right.
three though.
All right, Scott. I'm about tired of you making me and you feel old and Kyle young. But no, but no,
Uh,
that was
uh,
yeah. I mean, that was going to Japan. I think that was when again. I think that really started a movement for NASCAR to maybe realizing they need to reach a broader audience to the world to bring their style of racing to the world and not just America.
yeah, they even tried a few races in Mexico not too long ago, and they stopped that because apparently it's hard to go across the border from the U.S. to Mexico because they're having issues getting across the border, and then yeah, like other we'll say Brazil-esque issues in F1 where the area wasn't the greatest.
Mm.
Yep. Ain't
So
no
Coke
problems
Forest got
coming the
that
other
solved.
way, but there's problems going that way. But anyway, this ain't got nothing to do with
Mm.
politics. So
Yeah.
Oh hell no. So I guess JP would probably be more apt to answer this question than Kyle, since he is the F1 noob and you know NASCAR noob. But he can sit and listen and get some learnt in. Uh,
Hmm.
JP, you see anybody who runs in NASCAR like actually full time that would actually be an F1 that could actually be an F1 driver?
ooh, um, that's a tough question, but I'm gonna give one name who still kind of runs full time, and I have just about told myself over the last 15 years that I feel like he could drive anything. And I'm gonna actually go with Kyle Busch. I really believe that Kyle Busch, for the way he loves racing, that if he got with the right F1 team that could build him a car to compete, I really think Kyle Busch could learn how to drive it. If I want to go a little bit further back into the Rolodex, I think Tony Stewart could have. I just don't think he would have ever had the backing to go to F1 during his time. But as of guys who still, kind of driving irrelevant, I would definitely think that Kyle Busch could, because Kyle Busch is a racer. I mean, I swear I could give that guy a toilet seat with four wheels, and he would find a way to be in the top 15 at any NASCAR race, no matter what track it was. So my book, bang for my buck is going to be Kyle Busch when it comes to that, because I just feel like if he had time, he could figure it out to at least be competitive.
I think this was 5, 10 years ago that we had this discussion. Yeah, Kyle Busch definitely, hands down. He can win restrictor plate, short track, intermediate road courses. He has the aggression that you need to be an F1 driver.
Yep.
Able to um, the um, the willingness to attack a corner, to late break, to be your typical F1 driver, and he's kind of got that swagger, that air of confidence, like an F1 driver would have. He like when he walks into the garage, when he walks to his car, he is the baddest, mofo in the garage. He believes it, and he shows it on the track. Granted, it doesn't show in championships one, which he only has, I believe, was it one or two? But in just terms of
Yeah.
wins, I mean, across all three series, one of the most winningest drivers in
Yep.
NASCAR history. But it just proves the
Well,
guy, like, he just wants to race. Whether it's Truck Series, Xfinity, Cup Series, he'll go late model racing, some podunk little area just to race. And that's like I could see him in F1 like if it was 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, who knows? I mean, he's only 37, not that old. um, but I mean, I would love to see him try it, like just for shits and giggles.
yeah, and again, I said the name and I definitely agree with it. And I think the guy before him who kind of fit that mode of again driving anything with wheels, was Tony Stewart. Tony Stewart was the other guy that may not have had the championships that a Dale Earnhardt, a Jimmy Johnson, or even a Kyle Petty had. But I think you realized that when Tony Stewart walked into the garage, you were like, all right, there's something about this guy. He'll speak his mind. And I think when you look at the great F1 drivers, they have that edge. Max is not afraid to speak his mind to the Red Bull team. The same way with Lewis Hamilton to Mercedes, and you go all the way back to Michael Schumacher. There's a famous, I don't want to say famous, but there's an interview that Michael Schumacher did one time, and I think he was leaving F1, and they were talking about. The reporter was asking him about, you could go drive an Indy car. What are you thinking? He was like, no. IndyCar proves no challenge to me. He's like, why would I step down from an F1 car to an Indy car? He's like, there's just no challenge there for me because I've been on top of the motorsports world in an F1 car. So I do think that you have to have that attitude. And I clearly think to me, those two guys would carry that attitude to F1 that I'm just that good. I am here and I will arrive.
Yeah, that's a
Oh yeah.
great point.
Yeah, and going back to Tony Stewart, I mean, yeah, like Indy champion, NASCAR champion, like he had the background to do it, but I think he was more along the lines of, hell, I'm here for the party. NASCAR's the party.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I can accomplish this. I would have loved to see him try back in his younger, thinner days, but I guess he really wasn't very fit and thin. Maybe in
No,
his like maybe in his teens and early 20s. But when
they
he got to NASCAR, he had that beard belly going. He had that beard growing. He was kind of one of the good old boys.
yeah, they would have had to definitely on the F1 car, they would have had to cut down the side pods. He definitely couldn't have drove the Red Bull, let's just put it that way.
Yeah, they definitely would have to let the seat out, uh, maybe 7 inches just to get him to fit in there. Um, and also just quick, like if you're wondering, hey, could a NASCAR driver actually, like, if Kyle Busch wanted to actually go to F1 and race, could he do it? Actually, no, he can't. Um, so there is a super license point system. We're here about this informational stuff. Um, if you are a NASCAR driver, pretty much you'd have to win two back-to-back championships and then finish in the top five to gain enough super license points to run a F1 car. Um, when they say F1 is the pinnacle of motorsports racing, that's not a that's not just a tagline. It's when you hold a F1 super license, you can literally go to any racing series and just say, "Hey, I want to drive. I have my license." It goes anywhere. It is your it is your get out of jail free card. It is your I can do this because I'm an F1 driver. Indy, even if you raced Indy, the only way you can get a super license point, as we heard over this past off season with Colton Herta trying to get a ride with Alpha Tauri, um, you have to either win the Indy Series or the Indy Championship, or at least finish in the top three for 2 to 3 years. and he's kind of like the I'm going to win a few races and then wreck the others. So he never accrued the super license points, hence why he got axed going to AlphaTauri.
Hmm.
Yeah, and let's talk about let's go back in time because I really feel like a lot of people believe that Lewis Hamilton was really the first, um, I guess I could say, primary driver of color in F1. But if we actually go way, way back to 1986, there was a guy by the name of Willie T. Ribbs, and there was a special on Netflix about a documentary about him, about kind of his life in racing. But he actually was a guy who almost made it in F1 and just couldn't secure a seat with a team, and he kind of alluded to maybe it was the color of his skin at the time because when you look back then in F1, it was a lot of British guys. It was a lot of people, who were light complected. Let's just put it that way. There wasn't really anyone of color. So, even Willie T. Ribs, he competed Indy, qualified for the Indy 500. Um, did almost qualify for an F1 seat, but like I said, just kind of like barely missed the mark with the team. But just kind of talking about those guys who maybe barely missed out because of that points with making that transition to going there. But Willie T. Riz was just another guy who could just race.
Oh yeah, I not totally forgot about him, but he's just a name that kind of escaped me. But yeah, like racing NASCAR, he actually raced overseas, and I think it was the Formula Ford series.
Yep,
It was
sure
it was
did.
one of the feeder series where he just kind of ran out of pocket. Had a slight sponsorship, but like won races. Like he was ultra competitive, but couldn't secure an F1 ride. In
Yeah,
that same documentary on Netflix, he talked about how Bernie Eccleston was the one who got him, at least a test session in an F1
yeah,
car,
yep,
but and talked about trying to get him a ride if they could get sponsorship, but obviously it never occurred. But yeah, that's a guy who like he just grew up and all he did, he wanted to race, whether it was
yeah,
NASCAR, whether it was Indy, and even to at least 2 years ago, he was running because Tony Stewart started his little racing series, a SRX series. Willie T. Ribbs
yeah,
was one of the full time drivers, and last year he was just doing commentary with him. So I don't know if he
yeah.
gave up racing full time, but just yeah, another guy who just loved to race, whether it was open wheel or closed wheel.
And I think that's the one thing we take from racing. Let's look at NASCAR. Let's look at the guys who were really great. Let's look at a Richard Petty. Let's look at a Dale Earnhardt. Let's look at a Jimmy Johnson. It was guys who just were comfortable in the car. And I think that's the biggest thing for racers out there is do they get with the right team and they feel comfortable with a car? And when you look at Dale Earnhardt, when he was in what I call the three machine, because it's three for Dale here in North Carolina. Any NASCAR fans gonna know what that means. But sometimes you just find the right driver with the right car. But it even took Dale 20 years to win Daytona. Outside of flat tires, wrecks, what have you with the race. But I think racing really comes down to one thing, and I think it's about the driver you put in that car. And even in NASCAR, he has to know I'm willing to push this car to the limit and I'm going to get everything out of it that I can. And there's been numerous guys who would do that. And, Richard Petty was, great for it. He had the biggest motor in the starting grid. He would just put that freaking foot down and he would just hold that car in the middle of the road somehow and he would just go win races. But, when you look at those guys, those are the guys that I feel like people follow is he just a racer?
hmm Kyle, are you still awake?
Oh yeah, this has been great.
I was, yeah, just making sure I hadn't heard you say anything in quite a while. Just making sure you're alive, buddy.
No, just yeah,
Um,
just taking in all this information.
just basking in all our knowledge. Do you have any questions any more questions coming from a NASCAR noob?
No, you guys actually answered a lot of them just in your discussions. So I had one. Here it is. Where is it here? So the one thing I had with the race at Coda. So near the end in overtime, why did it keep going to overtime so much? Like, do they pause when there's a safety car late in that race?
Yes. So in NASCAR, it used to be like F1, where there was a designated finish. Like if it was supposed to go 70 laps, it was going 70 laps. If it was going 100, it was going 100
Uh,
laps. Um, but fans didn't like that because they don't like seeing races end under caution because they didn't have Toto Wolffs back in the day. Yeah, they
Okay.
didn't have Toto Wolffs in NASCAR. No, Michael,
it,
it's not
it,
right. It's not
it,
right.
it's not right, Kyle. It's not right. I don't know why you're doing this. It's not right, Kyle.
Yeah,
um,
the only reason I was wondering that because we saw in 2021, right, the final race of the F1 season, Max and Lewis end under that controversy. And then the next season there was a race where kind of the same thing was happening, but they finished under the safety car. So I was just wondering why NASCAR doesn't do that, and they did overtime like 5 or 6 times.
yeah, so it used to be like they had one overtime and then they had a couple races where it would go to overtime and then, well, they still end under caution. Well, let's do triple overtime. And then it was still doing it some races. So they just did, there's going to be they made it to where the race is going to end under green flag. Like no if, ands, or buts. We want the fans to feel like they got their money's worth, so we are ending under green. Uh, I would love to see F1 do that, but it's kind of hard since they don't do refueling anymore, and they pretty much pack the cars with enough fuel to last the said distance.
Hmm.
Um, but
Yeah,
I
and
would love to see F1 actually go to that.
yeah, with you bringing up that
Yeah,
refueling too, I remember Kimmy in the post race talking a little bit about his tire degradation just because there was so much overtime.
Yep.
yeah, and
Which
I
he was
think
running in top five for that race for a little bit. I'm sorry, JP.
no, I was gonna say I think that's another thing that we talk about. Coming from F1 to NASCAR. Not to open up something new here as maybe we get toward the end of the show, but
Hmm.
when you look at having to fuel throughout a race, and you know what in F1 you might come to the pits and take some fuel, but sometimes they're only taking fuel because they're changing tires. It's maybe not even really because the car really necessarily needs the fuel. They could conserve that fuel and maybe finish with a full tank of gas. So I think that's another big thing, that guys coming from open wheel racing and F1 to NASCAR, NASCAR, you're going to change tires a couple of times. But if you really look at some F1 races, you might only change tires one time because you only have to use two different tires through an F1 race. So you could start on, say, the mediums and then go to the softs and never come in again. um, but I do credit, NASCAR with trying to give the fans a finish because I agree. Watching guys let's say the last 10 laps, and they, go out on the track and the pace cars out there or the safety cars out there. No offense, just end the race if it's going to end that way. I don't even need to see these last 10 laps. So I do credit NASCAR with trying to do something to say, hey, we tried our dangest to get you an end of this race. It's just not going to be possible.
Okay.
Mhm. Well, that's kind of all I got for the show.
Yep.
You guys have anything else, Dad?
No, I
I,
just
listen,
go ahead.
I I'm going to
Oh, Dad,
say,
you can.
listen, we're coming into the third week of the F1 season, and
Yes, sir.
good Lord, is the F1 world turned upside down with Fernando and Aston Martin? I know Kyle's got to be loving it,
Uh,
as a Canadian with Lance Stroll and Fernando coming in. Um, but it's kind of crazy to see how the start of this year is pacing out, and you know, as this year goes on, do we see Max get another teammate because of Checo? Like, is this going to be Checo's fault if this continues to happen through the year? Um, listen, I want to tell you right now, Max's dad, you talk about a shady MFer, man, do not win that race over his son on the same team because you will get looked at out of the side of his eye, okay? And we all clearly saw it. But I really believe this is a good year for F1, and NASCAR is picking up steam with some of the F1 guys coming over. But I think we're in for a great year of racing when you look at where the teams are right now. I think we're in for a really good year of racing.
I agree.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And we'll definitely kind of get more into that with our Australian Grand Prix preview
Hmm.
coming up here in a few days. Man, I can't
That
wait for
we
that.
will.
But oh yeah. But yeah, I really want to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode. It was kind of a thrown together type deal. Like, just it was kind of cool with two former F1 champions being in a NASCAR race. Hey, maybe some of our listeners don't know anything about NASCAR or are still learning about F1, and they kind of want to know little differences, some of the names, some of the places. So it was great talking about it. But again, thank you for listening. I've been Scott.
I've been Kyle.
I'm John, and remember, everything is about a plan. A plan.
Thanks again, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Paddock Talk. Don't forget to like and share the episode, and check us out at Paddock Talk on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Discord.